Thanks for being here.
Glad to be here. Excited.
And you know, you're here very specifically to talk with me about something that you and I study very intently, and it's China.
Yep.
And I'd love to just start right off the bat with asking you, what do you think China's true intentions are in kind of their grand strategy? What is their grand strategy?
The grand strategy is very simple. It's to be a hegemonic world power. I mean, you can see through One Belt, One Road. You can see through Made in China 2025. You can see through everything they're doing, their strategy of being like the East India Company in sub-Saharan Africa, what they're doing in the Caribbean, now what they're doing in Latin America, the economic war, what we call all forces of government, right? All areas of government focus on the economic war against the United States, their military buildup, they're basically trying to close the South China Sea. It is the most geopolitically ambitious strategy we've ever seen. Let me be very specific. The three great theories of geopolitics. You've got Mackinder's theory of the Asian landmass. You have Mahan's theory of cutting off the choke points of the world's oceans. And you have Speakman's theory of keeping your enemy off of the Asian landmass. The Chinese are the only power in world history to ever try to do all three simultaneously. You know, Napoleon and Hitler and others tried to do the Eurasian landmass. Others, the British and the American empires, the British Empire and the American system we have today is built off Mahan's naval strategy, and then Speakman's is one from the early 20th century. What China is doing is with One Belt, One Road, trying to basically connect the old Silk Road all the way up to Italy. As we saw in the paper today, the Italian government, the guys in the five-star, De Maio came back from Beijing. They had a huge thing about, hey, we want to end the One Belt, One Road in Italy, where Marco Polo essentially left. We had a vote this week in the Maldives, which really rejected what they're trying to do in the Mahan strategy of taking all the naval bases and choke points throughout the world. And then Speakman, what they're trying to do is force the United States, which has been a Pacific power, off of the landmass through what they're doing in the South China Sea, what they're doing around Taiwan. They want to push us back to Guam. So listen, they're the most, people have said for years to kind of cover this. A lot of the Wall Street and City of London and Frankfurt crowd have kind of said, oh, well, you know, they're not territorially ambitious. They've never been an expansionist power. Well, they're a geopolitically expansionist power, and it's quite extraordinary what they're doing and doing it at the same time.
And do you think that their kind of, let's say, their newfound economic greatness or their perceived greatness post-financial crisis, they always believed they were kind of a second-rate power financially going into 2008, and the world seems to believe that they were the engine of the world's growth from 2009, 2018. Is it that economic growth that they build their geopolitical assertiveness on, in your opinion?
Well, listen, I think it's since time immemorial, the access to the Chinese market, kind of this mystery of the Chinese market, has always drawn in the West, right? Whether it's the British coming there at first with the East India Company, or later the China, schooners from the United States, right? The China trade. It was always this thing about China. What we've seen, and I happen to believe that the Chinese economic system is built on a house of sand, and I think it's going to lead us to a greater financial debacle than 2008 ever was, in the same culprits, the exact same culprits that led to the financial crisis in 2008. The investment banks, the commercial banks, the hedge funds, the government entities, right? The same elites that led to that financial crisis and got bailed out and had no responsibility, no accountability, have been the same exact actors that have exacerbated this situation in China. And so, yes, the reason the world's elites, the party at Davos, the people on Wall Street, what I call the IR departments of China, which are the investment banks, particularly Goldman Sachs and some commercial banks, the lobbyists for China, which is basically the 25 or 30 largest corporations that deal in China today. They're lobbyists in Washington, D.C. These are all, and by the big private equity guys like Schwartzman, these guys, they're all going to have to be held accountable for what went on in China. What China was able to do in basically coordination with the elites in the West was deindustrialize the industrial democracies of the West, both Europe and the United States. That's why Brexit and 2016 are inextricably linked. What it is the exporting of Chinese overcapacity and Chinese deflation in basic industrial goods. And so China has, and from the Chinese point of view, it's been quite brilliant. They've essentially taken 350 million of their people from kind of working poverty to middle class, and 400 million people from abject poverty to working poverty. So essentially 2/3 of their population, because their population I really think is closer to 1.3 or 1.4 billion than what they say in 1.1. So what they've done is heroic in 30 years, okay, from a strategy point of view. But that has been exacerbated by the elites in the West who basically kind of financed it and brought it along. In fact, the reason Trump was, I think, so special, he said, hey, this is not the way the world has to be. It could be very different. We've basically financed the rise of China. We've built China. And all he heard for years, and what you heard for years is, no, this is what I call the second law of thermodynamics, or this is an immutable law of physics, the rise of China. And what Trump says, no, this is through human agency. It's the commercial banks, the investment banks, the corporations, the kowtowed to the Chinese regime. And one thing I want to make sure, Kyle, I get up in front, this is not about the Chinese people. I served as a naval officer over in China, in the Western Pacific, in the 7th Fleet on a destroyer in the mid-70s. I think 76, 77 is the first time I went to China. I've been involved in China virtually all my life. I've owned businesses over there. I've lived in Shanghai for a while in the French concession. I have a great, not just admiration, but a deep love for the Chinese people. In fact, they have a saying over there called old 100 names, which is basically the common man, because there's 100 last surnames in China. So old 100 names is essentially the deplorables, right? And those in the old 100 names is a sense of common decency, their grit, their determination. What they've been through as a people is nothing short of heroic. The problem we have is we have a totalitarian regime of the Chinese Communist Party, and quite frankly, the leadership, the elite leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, that are really in business with the party at Davos, which is this, kind of scientific, engineering, managerial, financial, cultural elite that I say kind of emanates from the World Economic Forum in Davos, but really is in London and New York, Washington, D.C., Silicon Valley,